3 years ago, Nora Bennett, then 29, purchased her very first home. It wasn't a luxurious mansion or a sleek downtown condo, but a modest, cozy 2-bedroom craftsman-style house tucked into a quiet corner of East Portland. To anyone else, it may have looked like just another starter home, but to Nora, it was everything. It was victory. It was freedom carved out of years of struggle. It was a monument to breaking free from generational control. Growing up, Nora lived in a home where every decision, from what she wore to whom she befriended, was filtered through her parents' authority. Gregory and Linda Bennett weren't physically abusive, but their control seeped into every corner of her life. They called it protection, cloaking their micromanagement in the language of love. But to Nora, it slowly began to feel like a gilded cage. After high school, they insisted she attend a local community college and stay home. Instead, she quietly applied for a full-ride scholarship to Oregon State University. When the acceptance letter arrived, they had no valid reason to stop her. It was the first time she felt the wheel of her own life shift into her hands. Those 4 college years transformed her. Nora discovered her passion for personal finance and found genuine joy in helping others create healthy financial plans. After graduation, she started at the bottom at Brightwell Consulting Group, taking on extra hours studying for certifications and pushing herself relentlessly. By the age of 32, she had tripled her starting salary and saved enough for a down payment on her own. No cosigner, no help from family. When she signed the deed, her hands trembled not from fear, but from the weight of autonomy. For the first time, her life belonged to her. The house was small, but Nora poured her heart into every inch. She painted the walls herself, installed ceiling fans, tended to rows of lavender in the backyard. She set her desk by the window to catch morning sunlight and turned the kitchen into a creative escape where she baked every weekend. This was more than shelter, it was her sanctuary, a space to rebuild an identity long buried under family pressure and expectation. Her parents, unsurprisingly, were less than supportive. "It's too much house for one person," Gregory commented at the housewarming, eyeing the ceiling as if he were inspecting the workmanship. Linda just nodded, offering no compliment, repeating her old refrain. "You should have built an addition onto our house instead." But Nora didn't need their approval anymore. She had something far more valuable: freedom. And in every tile, every door frame, every freshly painted wall, she left a silent vow. "This is my life. No one gets to take that from me." That Sunday evening, Nora Bennett believed she was hosting a celebratory family dinner to share the biggest news of her career. She had just been promoted to senior financial consultant at Brightwell Consulting, a milestone she'd worked tirelessly toward for the past 5 years. It wasn't just a new title. It was proof of every late night, every certification exam, every holiday she'd traded for covering clients. She had prepared everything with care: red wine marinated steaks, her father's favorite roasted garlic mashed potatoes for her mother, and an apple pie baked from her grandmother's cherished recipe. The good china was set, candles were lit, and a bottle of Cabernet had been breathing since mid-afternoon. The house smelled warm, inviting, steeped in the quiet hope that maybe this time her parents would be proud. At 5 p.m. sharp, the doorbell rang. Nora smoothed her dress, smiled brightly, and opened the door only to hesitate. Standing beside her parents was her younger brother Travis, whom she hadn't invited. "Hope you don't mind her, Mother," Linda said as she stepped in without waiting for a reply. "Travis didn't have plans tonight, so we brought him along." "Of course not," Nora said quickly, masking her surprise and mentally recalculating dinner portions. She wasn't shocked. Travis was always inserted into family functions, still living in the apartment above their parents' garage, forever siding with them in disagreements, never recognizing Nora's independence as something admirable. Travis slouched onto the couch, glued to his phone, chuckling occasionally at text messages. Meanwhile, Gregory wandered into the kitchen and began critiquing her backsplash tile work. Linda examined the new curtains and inquired about their cost, her tone laced with polite judgment rather than genuine interest. After appetizers, Nora poured wine into their glasses and smiled. "I wanted to tell you this in person. The reason I invited you tonight is I've just been promoted." She paused, waiting. A beat of silence followed. Then Linda asked, "Does that mean you'll be working longer hours?" "That doesn't sound very healthy." Gregory chewed his steak, then asked, "How much more are they paying you?" She told him a significant raise. He exchanged a glance with Linda and nodded. "Well, good for you. About time they recognized your work." Travis snorted. "Must be nice getting paid that much to sit at a desk all day." The familiar sting of disappointment crept in sharp and bitter. Nora brushed it aside and kept the conversation light, but the mood had already soured. They barely acknowledged her news instead, spending 15 minutes discussing Travis's recent bathroom remodel job for a local diner. As Nora brought out dessert, her father suddenly sat upright, his demeanor shifting. "Nora," he said, voice formal and heavy, "your mother and I have been discussing your situation." "My situation?" she asked, confused. He set down his fork and looked her square in the eye. "This house, it's too much for one person. It should be used for the benefit of the whole family." Before she could respond, Linda chimed in. "We invested everything in you, your education, your upbringing. Your success is a result of our sacrifices." Nora turned to Travis, who was already nodding smugly. It felt like the room tilted, like she had stepped into a surreal play. This dinner, which was supposed to celebrate her growth, had become the opening act in something far more sinister. Nora couldn't quite remember when the wine glass slipped from her hand, but she would never forget the icy chill that ran down her spine when her father uttered the words, "This house belongs to the family now. It's time you handed over the keys." It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a direct, calculated statement delivered in the very kitchen she had spent months renovating, one tile and paint stroke at a time. A home she had built from sweat, sacrifice, and solitude. She turned to her mother. Linda didn't protest. She simply nodded, lips pressed into a thin line. Her expression made it clear this decision wasn't spontaneous. It had already been made. "You can gather your things over the next week," Gregory continued, his tone sharpening. "Travis will be here to make sure you don't take anything that belongs with the house." Nora froze. She steadied her breath, her voice hoarse. "This is my house. I bought it. I pay the entire mortgage. My name is the only one on the deed." "We're family," Gregory replied, each word deliberate. "Everything you have came from us. That means what's yours is ours." Linda added, "After all the sacrifices we made for you, this is how you repay us." The words, familiar in their cadence, landed differently this time. They pierced deeper. As if all her late nights at the office, every holiday missed, every silent battle to build something on her own, meant nothing. As if she was merely a vessel for her parents' entitlement. Travis, reclining comfortably, chimed in, "Mom always wanted an open kitchen. I'll knock down the wall between the dining room and kitchen first thing." And in that moment, Nora understood. This wasn't a spontaneous overstep. This was a long-planned move. And tonight's dinner had been the final step in their takeover. There was a silence, a charged, suffocating pause where she could have screamed, argued, defended. But something inside her held back. Something stronger. You don't reason with people who never saw you as your own person. So instead, Nora calmly reached into her bag. Her fingers trembled slightly, but her eyes were steady. She placed the house keys on the table, stood up, and took only her wallet, phone, and car keys. Her father called after her, voice clipped, "You'll regret this, Nora." She didn't respond. She walked out of the house that had once felt like a sanctuary, now a battlefield. The Portland night was brisk, but not colder than the betrayal that had just unfolded. Nora drove straight to Jenna Carter's apartment, her best friend, and the only person who had ever dared to say, "Not all family is safe." She cried the entire drive, not from weakness, but because for the first time she finally saw it clearly. Blood doesn't always mean love. The next morning, Nora woke up on Jenna's small apartment sofa, her neck stiff and her thoughts heavy like she had stumbled out of a nightmare. But the absence of her house keys in her purse and the memory of her parents' cold eyes reminded her that it wasn't a dream, it was real. Jenna had already left for work, leaving behind a sticky note. "Eat something, call a lawyer, and don't go back there alone." Nora folded it quietly and sat still. Her mind spun with questions she couldn't answer. Did her parents actually believe they had a claim to the house, or had this been planned all along? Her phone buzzed an unknown number. A knot formed in her stomach, but she answered anyway. "Miss Bennett. This is David Herrera from Northwest Heritage Mortgage. I'm calling regarding some unusual activity on your mortgage account." Nora's pulse quickened. What kind of activity? Yesterday, someone attempted to change the contact information on your file and requested to add co-borrowers to your mortgage. The request came in by phone, but our system flagged it as suspicious since it wasn't submitted through our secure portal. "Who made the request?" she asked, her voice tightening. "Gregory and Linda Bennett," David said. "They provided your social security number and date of birth correctly, so it was escalated for verification." Nora's breath caught. Her parents hadn't just demanded her keys, they'd tried to steal her home from a legal standpoint, even as she served them steak and pie in good faith. "They have no authorization," she said firmly. "I am the sole owner. No one else has any rights to that account." "Understood. We'll add additional security measures immediately," David replied. "And I'd recommend contacting law enforcement. This could constitute attempted fraud." When the call ended, Nora sat frozen, her phone slipping into her lap. Last night had been emotional devastation. This morning was legal confirmation of her worst fears. Her family hadn't just hurt her, they had tried to erase her ownership. She called the local police department and explained the situation. When asked whether her parents still had keys to the property, she exhaled. "I left them on the table last night. We suggest meeting officers at the home," the dispatcher said. "We can check for unauthorized entry and begin documentation." 2 hours later, Nora stood in front of the house that used to be her sanctuary, now shadowed in dread. A patrol car idled nearby. Using the emergency spare key hidden under the rear wheel well, she unlocked the door. The house was silent, but it didn't feel empty. Dishes from last night's dinner were crusted on the table, but the house keys were gone. Several drawers in her home office had been left ajar. "We recommend changing all the locks today," Officer Rodriguez advised gently, "and start documenting everything. This likely isn't the last incident." And just as she feared it was only the beginning, Nora stepped into the law office with dark circles under her eyes and shoulders hunched beneath the invisible weight of a crumbling world. Barbara Mitchell, the attorney Jenna had recommended, sat behind a polished mahogany desk. Her silver hair was neatly pinned back, her eyes sharp, like someone who had seen every version of human betrayal. "Start from the beginning," Barbara said, skipping pleasantries. So Nora told her everything. Her voice was shaky at first, but grew steadier with each detail, from the dinner that turned into a key-demanding ambush to the call from the mortgage company revealing her parents' attempt to seize her home. Barbara didn't interrupt, only nodded now and then, her pen moving quickly across a legal pad, her gaze unwavering. They didn't just cross a boundary, Barbara concluded. They stepped into criminal territory, attempted property theft, identity fraud, and intimidation. She recommended that Nora sign a release to conduct a comprehensive background check on Gregory and Linda Bennett. Blood ties are one thing, Barbara said, but patterns tell the real story. People don't usually commit this level of manipulation for the first time at 60. Within 30 minutes, her investigator returned with a file thick enough to confirm that suspicion. Barbara flipped through it, her face hardening. "There it is," she said, pointing. 2 years ago, they took out a second mortgage on their own home, still unpaid. 3 credit cards in collections. And this? She paused, voice lowering. 7 years ago, your mother's mom filed a formal complaint claiming they tried to transfer her retirement accounts into their names. The complaint was later withdrawn, but the documents remain. Nora felt something twist deep in her chest. Her grandmother, gentle, distant, often quiet, had once tried to sound the alarm, but no one had listened. And now it was happening again. This time to her. Tears spilled over before she could stop them. Not from grief, but from a numb, crushing recognition of how deep the betrayal went. Barbara gently slid a tissue box toward her. "I know this is painful, but we need to move fast. First, we'll send a formal cease and desist letter, then file for a temporary restraining order to keep them away from your home and workplace. Third, you must change all your locks and upgrade your home security." Nora nodded slowly, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't want to completely cut them off. They're still my parents." Barbara set her pen down and looked her in the eye. If they were co-workers, neighbors, or ex-partners, people who did this to you, would you hesitate? The question landed like a mirror. And for the first time, Nora saw the reflection clearly. Family does not excuse abuse. Blood does not override boundaries. The meeting ended with a thick folder of paperwork, a clear defensive plan, and a grief she had no name for. But amid the mental fog and heartbreak, one thing stood out. This time she wouldn't stay silent. 2 days after her meeting with attorney Barbara Mitchell, Nora returned to her home, her first time back since the night she'd been told to leave. This time she brought a police officer and a locksmith. Her hands trembled as the car turned onto her street. It felt like she was approaching a battlefield rather than the sanctuary she once called home. But what made her stomach drop wasn't memory, it was reality. Her father's SUV and Travis's pickup truck were parked in front of her house. "They're not supposed to be here," she told Officer Wilson, her voice tight with a mix of fear and fury. "Stay in the car," the officer instructed. "I'll check first." Nora watched from behind the windshield as he walked up and knocked. The door opened. Gregory stood there, not surprised, just irritated. After a brief exchange, the officer motioned for her to come up. As she climbed the steps, she saw inside Linda rearranging the couch, Travis removing artwork from the walls. They moved through her space like they owned it. Officer Nora said, trying to stay composed, "I want them out of my house now." "Do you have any legal documentation granting you access to this property?" the officer asked her parents. "We're her parents," Gregory said proudly. "This is a family house. Are your names on the deed or mortgage?" "We don't need them to be," he snapped. "Everything Nora has is because of us. This house is a family investment." "That's not how property law works," Officer Wilson replied. "You don't have the legal right to be here without the owner's consent." Linda, now teary-eyed, stepped forward. "Nora, you brought police into this. We're family." Nora clenched her fists. "What kind of family breaks into your home, moves your furniture, and rifles through your private documents?" Just then, Travis emerged from her office holding a file box. Nora's stomach dropped. She recognized it as the container where she kept sensitive documents, tax returns, legal papers, even a copy of her Social Security card. "Put that down, Travis," she said sharply. Officer Wilson turned to her. "Miss Bennett, do you want these individuals removed from the property?" "Yes," she said, voice unwavering. "And I want to see what else they've taken." Within 15 minutes, the police had escorted all 3 out of the house. Gregory muttered threats about family loyalty and how she'd regret this. Linda alternated between crying and glaring coldly. Travis shot her a look of betrayal, as if she were the one tearing the family apart. Once they were gone, Nora combed through the house. Her grandmother's jewelry box was missing. Her birth certificate gone, several family photos, financial records, and even her backup hard drive were nowhere to be found. Her office computer was still on, but had been clearly accessed. "I'd recommend filing for an emergency restraining order," Officer Wilson said, while taking down notes. "This is escalating fast." And Nora understood then this was no longer a family dispute. This was a coordinated invasion, and she had to protect herself no matter how painful it was. Less than 24 hours after the police escorted her family out of her home, Nora's phone exploded with a tidal wave of angry messages. They came from distant relatives, old classmates, even acquaintances she hadn't heard from in years. "How could you be so cruel to your parents? I heard you threw your family out of the house. They raised you and now you repay them like this over property." Each message felt like a slap. But what hurt most wasn't the misinformation, it was how quickly people believed it without ever asking her side. It didn't take long to trace the source. Her parents, Gregory and Linda, had already launched a campaign of emotional PR painting Nora as the ungrateful daughter who turned her back on the family that built her life. Their version of events, that they merely showed up to help reorganize things and were met with betrayal and police. The next day, Gregory posted a lengthy Facebook status. In it, he described the pain of being rejected by your own child and the heartbreak of watching success erase family values. The post included a photo of Nora in her high school graduation gown, smiling between her parents. The caption read, "Remember this girl, she used to appreciate us." The post went viral within their extended family circle. Dozens of shares, dozens of comments, condemnations, thinly veiled threats, and emotional blackmail. Nora sat in silence staring at the screen, not just hurt, but erased. No one asked her. No one questioned the story. They simply accepted it. Jenna remained her rock. Together they drafted a simple response that Nora could send privately to those who messaged. "I'm sorry if you've received misinformation. My parents attempted to seize a home I bought and legally own. This is now a legal matter and I can't discuss further. Some people backed off, but others doubled down. Family matters should stay private. Using a lawyer against your parents, how shameful. No matter what they did, they're still your blood." The backlash wasn't limited to strangers. Relatives she once trusted, an aunt, a cousin sent messages laced with disappointment or simply cut contact. Meanwhile, Barbara received a letter from the Bennett's new attorney requesting a neutral mediation meeting to resolve what they described as a misunderstanding over shared family property. Nora's stomach turned. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing. Just a thinly veiled attempt to sweep it all under the rug without accountability. She remembered what Barbara had once told her. Manipulators always want to shift the conversation from behavior to emotion. They don't want to be confronted. They want compliance. As Nora turned off her phone, one thing became crystal clear. Her family didn't just want her house. They wanted her narrative. But for the first time in her life, she knew she wasn't going to let them write her story anymore. Nora once believed the worst betrayal was her parents demanding the keys to her home. But she was wrong. What followed wasn't just a battle over property, it became a campaign to unravel her entire life. Just days after the confrontation at her house, Nora received a call from a credit monitoring agency. Someone had attempted to open a credit card in her name using her parents' home address. The system flagged it thanks to the alerts Nora had set up. It was the first clear sign they hadn't stopped. A week later, her boss Ethan called her into his office. His face was tight with concern. "Nora," he said quietly, "we received an anonymous email. The sender claims to be a family member. They accused you of being mentally unstable and financially irresponsible, said you're unfit to manage client accounts." Nora's hands curled into fists. She handed Ethan a copy of her temporary restraining order and explained the situation, keeping it brief. Ethan listened carefully, then nodded. "We stand with you," he said firmly. "Our legal team will treat this as defamation against an employee." Still, even with the company's support, Nora felt pieces of her life slipping away. Similar emails reached a few of her high-profile clients. Thankfully, none believed the claims. But what chilled her was the fact that someone had accessed her contact database to even know who to target. Barbara, her attorney, documented every incident, adding them to the growing legal file. She immediately filed for a permanent restraining order as well as formal charges for defamation, identity theft, and professional sabotage. "This has gone far beyond a family conflict," Barbara told her. "This is targeted psychological abuse, and the court needs to see that." In the hearing, Gregory, Linda, and Travis maintained their roles as misunderstood victims, but this time, the evidence was overwhelming. The anonymous emails were traced back to her parents' home IP address. Attempts to open accounts in her name, accessing personal data, loitering near her office, every action was clearly laid out before the judge. When questioned about his repeated presence near Nora's house despite the restraining order, Travis shrugged and said, "I just wanted to make sure everything was okay." The judge responded bluntly, "Concern doesn't come with surveillance or legal violations." By the end of the hearing, the restraining order was made permanent. The judge warned that any future violations would result in criminal prosecution. Walking out of the courtroom, Nora didn't feel triumphant. She felt hollow. Something long attached to her identity had finally been severed. But for the first time, she no longer had to justify her right to peace. The law now stood behind her. In the midst of the chaos, Nora understood something important. The most dangerous harm doesn't always look like harm. It wears the mask of concern and family. And she chose with full clarity she didn't need the kind of love that came with destruction. The Portland County Courthouse looked both grand and unfamiliar that morning. Nora walked into the courtroom with Barbara at her side, a thick binder of evidence in her arms, defamation emails, security reports, credit alerts, and surveillance images. She had prepared for this, but her hands still trembled, not out of fear, but grief. Her family entered shortly after. Gregory wore a suit that had seen better days, Linda clutched her purse like a shield, and Travis stood tall with his arms crossed. Not one of them met Nora's eyes. No acknowledgement, no remorse. Before the session began, their attorney James Westfield approached Barbara with a pre-hearing proposal. If Nora dropped her case, the family would agree to counseling and respectable distance. Barbara's response was cool and sharp. "My client doesn't negotiate with calculated fraud and sustained harassment." Judge Elena Martinez, composed and perceptive, opened the hearing and invited both sides to speak. Westfield began, "This is a miscommunication between a daughter and her well-meaning parents. The Bennett family has always operated with shared financial responsibility." Barbara rose without hesitation. One by one, she laid out the facts, the attempted identity fraud, with the mortgage lender anonymous defamatory emails sent to Nora's workplace, and clients' attempts to access private accounts, and the IP trail leading directly to Gregory's home. Each item landed with quiet force, dismantling the illusion of a concerned family. When Gregory and Linda spoke, they leaned heavily into emotion. Linda dabbed her eyes. "We only wanted to help. Nora's always been so stubborn. We thought she might hurt herself by pushing too hard." Gregory added, voice tight, "Everything she has is because of our sacrifices, and now she turns on her own family." Judge Martinez was unmoved. "Are your names on the deed to this property? No. Did you contribute financially to the purchase? No. But there is no but," she interrupted. Travis tried to play the role of the concerned younger brother, but when asked why he repeatedly appeared near Nora's home despite the restraining order, he replied, "I felt responsible for checking on her." The judge looked him dead in the eye. Family status does not exempt you from the law. Finally, the gavel struck. A permanent restraining order was granted against all three Bennetts, forbidding them from approaching Nora's residence workplace or contacting her by any means. Judge Martinez concluded, "The behaviors described indicate a disturbing pattern of control and boundary violation. Miss Bennett is entitled to peace." As the courtroom emptied, Linda whispered, "Nora, we're still family." Nora looked at her not with rage, but something colder. "Family doesn't do this," she replied. Then she turned away, Barbara's hand gently on her shoulder, reassurance in human form. At last the truth had spoken. A month after the court hearing, just when things seemed to quiet down, Nora found a handwritten letter in her mailbox. No stamp, no return address. The handwriting on the envelope was unmistakably Linda's. Inside was a 5-page letter, her mother's apology. Linda wrote that she was sorry things had gotten so tense, that they didn't realize how hurt you were, that it all came from a place of concern and fear of losing you. But across 5 pages, not once did she say they were wrong. Nowhere did the phrase "we take responsibility" appear. Instead, the letter circled around familiar lines. "Family is forever, blood ties can't be broken, and please forgive what's in the past." At the end, Linda wrote, "We'll always be here if you're ready to let go of the anger." Nora folded the letter, her heart calm, too calm. She wasn't angry. She was awake. For the first time, she could clearly tell the difference between a real apology and a request to erase accountability. The next day, Travis texted from a new number. "Mom's not well. You should come." Attached was a photo of Linda lying in bed looking weary, but Nora noticed the blanket on her one that used to be in Nora's own home. Barbara reminded her gently, "Forgiveness is yours to give. But ask yourself, do they want forgiveness to change or to continue unchecked?" Nora chose to write back. Brief, firm, no justifications. "I'm not angry anymore, but I can't open my door to people who won't take responsibility. Blood doesn't grant immunity from consequence, and love should never cost safety." No one replied. But a week later, a distant aunt called. "Would you consider speaking to your mother? She's been crying a lot. She says you cut everyone off over a misunderstanding." Nora responded softly. "If someone cries because they can no longer control you, that's not remorse. That's the loss of power." The call ended in silence. That evening, Nora burned her mother's letter in the fireplace. Not out of hate, but out of the need to end a cycle she had been trapped in for years. She finally understood true forgiveness doesn't begin when someone says sorry. It begins when you stop carrying what was never yours to bear. 4 months after the final court hearing, Nora stood in the center of her new living room, a cozy cottage on the northern edge of Portland. It wasn't grand like the old house, nor particularly spacious, but everything inside had been chosen by her. The cool gray-blue walls, the soft beige love seat by the large sunlit window, every detail whispered peace. Most importantly, this time no one else had a key. Every item held meaning. The earthy rug was a gift from Jenna on moving day, so you always remember the ground beneath you is yours. The sunflower print in the kitchen was a present to herself, a reminder to rise even after years in the shadows. The house wasn't fully furnished yet, but even in its unfinished state, it felt like home. No more unexpected knocking. No more double locking the doors in fear. No more anonymous calls at midnight. On weekends, she and Jenna planted lavender in the backyard. As they pressed the roots into the soil, Jenna asked, "Do you think you've forgiven them?" Nora paused, eyes on the earth. "I think. I no longer wait for an apology, and I don't feel like I owe anyone an explanation anymore. Maybe that's what forgiveness feels like." For her, healing didn't mean going back to what was. It meant not wanting to return anymore. She resumed therapy with Dr. Camille not to learn how to endure family, but to build a life that didn't revolve around pleasing others. She began rewriting old journal entries this time, daring to name her parents next to the word wound. Not out of blame, but honesty. Her job at Brightwell Consulting had stabilized too. In fact, Nora had come to realize something ironic. She used to believe she couldn't thrive without her family's approval, but now that they were gone, what truly belonged to her had finally begun to bloom. One late afternoon, sitting at her new desk with sunlight streaming through the window, she picked up a marker and wrote on the whiteboard, "I don't need a house to prove my worth, but now I have a home and I built it." She still kept a few old photographs, not out of nostalgia, but to remind herself of what she'd survived. She hadn't erased the past, but she no longer let it lead. And perhaps the most important thing she'd learned was this: not everyone deserves a place in your next chapter, and that doesn't make you unloving. It just means you're finally loving the right person, starting with yourself. One crisp autumn morning, Nora woke earlier than usual. She brewed her coffee, opened the window to let in the fresh air, and sat at her desk where the final contract awaited paperwork, confirming that the full ownership of her new home now rested solely in her name. No joint claims, no shared signatures, no strings. As her pen slid across the last line, Nora didn't smile. She exhaled. It wasn't joy that filled her, it was something deeper: peace. A chapter had closed not with a bang, but with quiet certainty, freedom. Once a vague dream had become something tangible. It had shaped a home no one could reclaim, a phone number she didn't owe answers to, a life where silence no longer required permission. A few years ago, if you'd asked Nora what legacy meant, she would have said money, property, or family honor, things her parents used as leverage. But now the definition had transformed entirely. Legacy to her was breaking the cycle. It was refusing to pass pain down like an heirloom. It was ending the silence, the control, and the guilt that clung from generation to generation. It was ensuring that future children wouldn't have to endure their family, but could instead choose it. One afternoon, Nora spoke at a support group for adult survivors of toxic households. She shared her story not for pity, but to offer proof that choosing yourself wasn't crazy, that boundaries weren't betrayal, that walking away wasn't weakness. After her talk, a young woman asked, "Don't you feel guilty leaving your parents behind?" Nora gave a small smile. "I used to feel guilty for living as myself. Now I'd feel guilty teaching others to suffer just to be called a good daughter." Later that day, someone slipped her a handwritten note. It was from a girl named Maya. "Your story was the first time I didn't feel alone. Thank you for living honestly." Nora kept the note on her desk next to the sunflower print. It reminded her that some legacies aren't built on wealth. They're passed down through truth, through courage, through the refusal to repeat what broke us. She no longer needed approval. She didn't need to prove anything. She didn't need to earn love by sacrificing herself. This was her true legacy, a life she chose freely without asking anyone's permission.